I've gone back and forth a little bit on whether or not to continue filming this video. I'm filming this voiceover after filming day 3 because I'm just not sure exactly how helpful it'll be since these recipes, I'm laughing at my daughter. The first recipe I made was a skillet orzo and fish recipe. And this is from the Defined Dish. I will leave the link down below. I did make a few changes, but I'll go over that. I think it's a French term called mirepoix. I can't remember. I should know because I took French for 5-6 years. So I'm starting off by cutting up the onion and garlic. That's going to be a repeat for a lot of these recipes, starting off with onion and garlic. It just adds flavor. And then I'm adding the cherry tomatoes. I didn't measure the cumin, paprika, and salt and pepper. I just kind of went off of what I thought was right. And then I did measure the balsamic vinegar because I didn't want to go overboard because I don't think it's supposed to be a very heavy flavor in this dish. I know especially my husband does not love any vinegar thing, so I didn't want to go overboard. So I measured that. I do try and pick a lot of recipes that like only take 1, maybe 2 pots maximum. I like recipes that I can kind of get it going and then set it and forget it, something like in the oven. I also try and make my recipes, like what I'm picking for dinner each week, work for me. So for example, if I know that my husband is going to be home late one day, I will make sure that I'm making a recipe that's pretty hands-off, like something in the crock pot probably. For me personally, I know by like Thursday, Friday, I am usually quite tired, and so I'm gonna pick easier recipes for those days. All right, back to the meal. So now I'm adding the orzo, like the recipe said, after the tomatoes cook for a little bit. Ran out of chicken broth, so I did a little bit less chicken broth than the recipe calls for, as you can see, and I actually used vegetable broth instead of chicken broth. And the last thing that I did differently than what the recipe calls for, instead of feta, I did ricotta, because ricotta is much more of a milder, neutral flavor, and I knew that this would just go better. So ricotta would just do better with my husband and then probably with my son. This is a good recipe just because, as I said, it's nice that once you get it going and get everything ready, you stick it in the oven, pop it out of the oven, and then stick it back in the oven so you have some time, some downtime to like wash the dishes, anything else that you can fit in 10 to 15 minutes. Just nice to have the extra time. Moving on to day 2, I made sausage tortellini soup. This recipe is from the Cozy Cook, but once again, I change a few things, and I've made this recipe a few times. It's pretty good, very easy. The ingredients are very accessible in my opinion, and everything comes together in 30 minutes, starting off with onion and garlic. Once again, this is also a 1-pot recipe. The fridge is popping open once again because I don't know if I explained. Yeah, I didn't explain. My daughter, she loves berries, and so what I do is I have like little berry containers in the fridge and I wash them up, and she pops in the fridge and just grabs them while making dinner. Going back to the recipe, starting off with onion and garlic again, I said this would be a common theme for a lot of these recipes. I always do extra garlic because I just like the flavor of extra garlic, and garlic is also so good for you. I remember when I'm not going to go into that. Okay. The only thing I skip in this recipe is the ½ teaspoon mustard powder. The Cozy Cook does include a note saying that like it adds something extra. I don't have mustard powder. I'm not going to buy mustard powder just for this recipe. I guess I could probably add like a squirt of actual mustard, but what I don't like doing, I don't like when I see a recipe and I see like some obscure ingredient that I'm like, could it make that much of a difference? Do I want to spend, how much is mustard powder? I'm sure at least $5. Do I want to spend that extra money for this one ingredient that I'm not going to use in any other recipes? Usually the answer is no, and I'll just go ahead and skip it. That's a little tip. A lot of the times that one strange ingredient, if you skip it, it's still going to be good. Maybe it's better with the ingredient. I don't know, but I will just skip it most of the time. For this recipe, I ended up doing, instead of the kale, I did spinach because that's what I had on hand. I had frozen spinach. Let's see, what else did I change? So I kind of split the recipe in half, but kind of not. I did ½ pound of the ground Italian sausage instead of a pound, but then I still did the 2 cups of tortellini. I just feel like a pound of sausage is unnecessary. It's just like a lot of meat in my opinion for this recipe. And then I use beef broth instead of chicken broth because that's what I had on hand from the week before. And then I ran out of beef broth, so I just used water for the rest of it and it was fine. I also think I did a little bit less heavy cream just to make this recipe like not as heavy, not as rich. is a better word. Everything else is about the same of the recipe online, and I just use store-bought tortellini. I'd love to make homemade pasta one day. Probably one weekend coming up, I'll set aside some time to make some homemade pasta and maybe include that in a vlog. So subscribe if you want to see that. The next recipe is pasta with vodka sauce, penne alla vodka if you will, except I very rarely actually use penne. I actually prefer this recipe with rigatoni. This time I happen to have, what's it called, rotini on hand, so that's what I use. And I use a recipe that's from like Gigi Hadid. I've made this recipe a lot. I hardly have to measure at this point, but this time I wanted to make it a little bit healthier. So instead of doing a half cup of heavy cream, I think I cut that down a little bit. And then I always do more vodka than the recipe calls for. The recipe calls for 1 tablespoon. I do 2. The alcohol cooks out, but I actually like the flavor of the vodka, which is interesting because I don't like the flavor of vodka in like an actually alcoholic drink. That's besides the point. And then I skipped the butter, and then the actual main substitution that I did in the pasta sauce, you normally do a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. I replaced that with ricotta just to add a little bit more protein, and I couldn't really taste a difference. I actually think I liked it a little bit better. What I want to try next time is doing probably like 2 tablespoons ricotta, 2 tablespoons Greek yogurt to up the protein and lower the fat. And then I also added some frozen peas because normally when we have this recipe, we have like some kind of salad or veg on the side, and I didn't have that. So I wanted to make sure there was something. And then peas also add some fiber and protein and obviously other micros because it is a veggie. Anything that is an actual recipe online that you can find, I'm going to link it down. If I forget, just remind me. I feel like I'm also showing you the recipe, so if I forget, you can still see it, but I want to make sure I'm calling these people out that it's their recipe. The next recipe is definitely one of my go-tos. It's General Tso tofu. I'm pretty sure I've shared this recipe. That's Jude Girl. I'm pretty sure I've shared this recipe on my channel before. That's not cheese, that's tofu. But I think it's definitely worth sharing again. It just comes together in about 15 minutes, takes 3 ingredients. And if you don't like tofu, you could do this with chicken. If you don't like broccoli, you could do this with another veg. I just think tofu works well with this, and I like tofu, and this is a way that my husband loves tofu. And then broccoli, I think, is a good vegetable for this because it holds up really well to the sauce, which you will see. The first thing I'm doing is taking a full block of tofu. This particular brand comes in 2 halves, but I just do the whole thing. And then I like to cut it in this manner because it makes it easier for my son to eat. He's 8 months old. I would say this is a great way to cut your tofu for any of your babies under a year old. If you want to do cubes, that works well too, but you do have to like flip it a little bit more, and it's a little bit harder for younger babies to eat. After the tofu has fried on both sides, I add the broccoli and let the broccoli cook a little bit, and then I add this General Tso sauce from Trader Joe's. I'm sure other stores have it, but I always pick up this one from Trader Joe's because it just tastes really good. And I like to top mine with some sesame seeds, and we have it with rice on the side. This was frozen rice, makes this recipe come together even faster. And there you have it. Moving on to the final recipe, I decided to just do 5 recipes for this video because normally I'm only cooking 5 to 6 times a week. I think it's very rare that people are cooking every single day of the week. Maybe you have some leftovers, maybe you go out to eat, maybe you go to a friend's house for dinner, order takeout, things like that. So I just did 5. The next thing I'm making are some chicken and bell pepper quesadillas. I'm making homemade tortillas. You can obviously just buy store-bought. I buy store-bought quite often. If you are gluten-free, Siete is a great brand for store-bought. If you are not gluten-free and you just want flour tortillas, Viva Hermosa, I believe, is the brand. Great flour tortillas. If you have a Whole Foods near you, they make in-house tortillas, are fantastic. But if you want to make them yourself, I'll put the measurements on the screen. It actually comes together very, very easily and quite quickly. Most of the time that it takes to make the homemade tortillas is just like the rest time for the tortillas and then actually like frying them up, cooking them on the stove. But mixing the ingredients and making the tortillas themselves is the quickest part. You're going to be hearing noises in the background. My babies are playing. It's just the reality. If you're a parent, you get it. If you're not, you're probably a little bit annoyed, but it is what it is. Anyway, while I was making the tortillas, I was boiling some chicken. This just makes it really easy to shred it up. If you didn't want to do boiled chicken, you could always just cook the chicken up on the stove, or you could just use leftover chicken. Quesadillas is a great way to use leftover chicken, leftover like ground beef, leftover shredded pork, something like that. I decided to add the bell peppers just to add some kind of veg. I really tried to have some kind of veggie at every single dinner. Actually, almost all meals I like to have at least one veggie and one fruit. Once the chicken was done boiling, I just went ahead and shredded it with 2 forks. You could also use like a hand mixer attachment to shred up your chicken. And then once the tortillas were done cooking, I shredded up some, I believe it was cheddar cheese, put 1 layer of the cheese, put the chicken, put the bell peppers on top, and then put another tortilla on top, cook that up. Once the cheese was melted, it was good to go. I served mine with some avocados, some Greek yogurt, and salsa on the side. And that is everything for this video. I hope it was helpful. Again, as I said, I went back and forth on filming this video, so I just wasn't sure how helpful it would be. But then I said, you know what? I'm always looking for dinners for my weekly dinner menu when I'm coming up on the weekend. Like, what are we making for dinner this upcoming week? So I decided to move forward with this video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me. Bye.